Alright, my number 9. Hopefully I'm going to do a larger review of this because I do plan on doing this soon, along with some of the movie reviews of the recent movies I've seen. My number 10 is Arsenal. On one hand, it's a generic, bland action thriller, crime drama, whatever you want to call it. It's so bland, it's forgettable, it is boring. On the other hand, it has moments in it where it is entertainingly bad and just amazing. You know, all the straight-to-DVD or limited releases that Nicolas Cage has been in, and they're just so boring and bland, and you're thinking, a Nick Cage freakout would save this movie. I just want a Nick Cage freakout. And you don't get it in those movies, like Left Behind or Pay the Ghost. But you know what? You get a few in Arsenal. And that might be enough to watch this movie. If you love Nick Cage freakout moments, if you love his so bad it's good moments in films, you'll get your money's worth, at least for the second half of the film. Nick Cage is amazingly entertaining in this movie, and it's the only reason this movie is number 10 rather than in the top 5 worst. Because if he wasn't in this, it would just be boring, bland, forgettable, and just awful. My number 9, pretty recent movie I saw, in June at least. It was Despicable Me 3. I really enjoyed the first Despicable Me. I was extremely disappointed with the second one. The Minions movie, I was entertained about halfway through until I started hating the second half. Despicable Me 3, probably the worst of the 4, to be honest. I barely laughed. There were a few elements that I like the villain. The voice acting is fine. Gru's brother Drew is annoying as hell. It tries to it tries to do a lot of things that movies this year have been doing, is having a bunch of stories, having a bunch of character arcs within a movie. But in this film, they don't tie in with the main film enough to really feel like it's gratifying. And not only that, the character arcs are so little and so underdeveloped that it feels lazy. There's a lot of this film that just feels lazy. The Minions are really annoying. There's a few things with them that I enjoyed, like when they're in the prison. There's a lot of really interesting visual gags in this movie, but honestly, those are the only things that are amusing, the visual gags, because any other jokes, any other piece of storytelling is just surface level and not offensive, but just not good. Number 8. This probably should be higher, and it will be higher for most people. When I did a movie review for this, the raw footage of it was over an hour long because I had a lot to talk about, and I didn't even cover all the things I wanted to talk about. It is Transformers: The Last Knight. There's a lot of bad things about this movie. A lot of things that are same old Michael Bay, and in some ways are kind of good, in some ways are also bad. There's a few moments that, even though the comedy is just immature, really drags the movie, really just puts you in a mind-numbing mood, there are a few jokes that I did laugh. And Anthony Hopkins playing a character with some form of dementia that's just batshit crazy was entertaining as well. I have no problem with the CGI. I have no problem with the visual effects. The action is handled well. It is typical Michael Bay, but at the same time very coherent in this movie. And the story isn't as bad as Age of Extinction. It doesn't feel like a story that starts and then a whole nother story starts and then the ending of the first story ends without the ending of the second story they introduced in the middle. It doesn't feel like separate stories. It feels like one story. It also feels like a bunch of different stories combining into one, and a bunch of those side stories are completely unnecessary and just convoluted to a point where it's like, why? There's a few moments in this movie I just questioned why. I was never confused with the movie. I was just like, why? Why did you decide to do this? Why does this benefit the movie? This doesn't benefit the movie. And like the dinosaurs of Age of Extinction, where you thought, oh, we're going to have these Dinobots. Awesome, throughout the movie. In this one, you're like, oh, Optimus Prime is bad. He's being controlled and manipulated. And he's going to fight his friends. And they're going to have to fight him and then try to win him back. Nope. That's the last 40 minutes of the film. He only has one fight against Bumblebee. And then he is completely cured of his hypnotized state. Whatever you want to call it. Oh, there's so many bad things about this movie, but at the same time, it's not as bad as other Transformers movies have been. I don't think it's as bad as Revenge of the Fallen. I don't feel it's as bad as Age of Extinction. I think it's right in the middle. The worst thing about this movie, though, the constant ratio changes in this film. It is just... Once you notice it, and I can't imagine you not noticing it, it's just headache-inducing. Not as headache-inducing as another movie I'll talk about higher on this list, but still headache-inducing. My number 7 is a movie that I missed in theaters in January, but I did see later on when I was watching January films I missed. Didn't review it yet. Underworld, Blood Wars. Just imagine any of the other Underworld films just done in a more boring fashion. Same old, with just elements of story that's just not all that good. You get Underworld Blood Wars, I guess. Alright, number 6 is a type of thriller where you get almost every year with a sort of fatal attraction, sort of crazy ex or crazy person that is obsessed with another person. We get this kind of movie almost every year. This year it is Unforgettable. The sad thing about this movie is when I watched it, I honestly found potential in moments where it could have been dramatic and actually could have been a good story, believe it or not. But it's so focused on Katherine Heigl and how she sets up our main character that it just becomes boring. And I have to say, both lead actresses, they're the best part of this movie. They act well. They're great in this movie. Unfortunately, they're in a bad movie. But I will say the last 40 or so minutes, entertaining as hell and so good, so bad that it's good. You just have to slog through an hour of just complete boring, bland nonsense before you get to the really entertaining nonsense. And as bad as that ending is, oh God, I loved it and I laughed my ass off. Now I said something about Transformers The Last Night being headache-inducing with the ratio changes within scenes, but it's not as headache-inducing as all the jump cuts done in the action sequences of Resident Evil, the final chapter. Never before have I had a movie where the main reason I hate it and dislike it is because of the editing. Rarely I ever notice editing in a movie, and so it's just one of those buffer scores that can add to the average of the more critical score in my reviews. This is one of the few times where editing actually harmed it and made it one of the worst films of the year for me. And while Resident Evil movies with each film changes the backstory and sort of like completely erases the endings of each other one, like it adds something really crazy and ridiculous with a cliffhanger and then completely washes all that out to start over with each one. Never before have I felt like it completely erases the backstory given to several other movies of the franchise, as well as wiping out any potential to a good next chapter. Because Remember when you're like, oh, all these characters are in Washington, D.C., they're all going to work together along with Wesker, they're going to defeat the evil. Nope. We don't even get to see that battle. We just see that Alice is the only one left alive and presumably everyone else is dead. Except for Wesker, because it's revealed he's still alive. And even though the characters of these movies haven't been the greatest, there aren't anything really memorable, at least I can remember a lot of the other ones. I still don't even remember the characters of this film. All the side characters. But again, the worst part of this movie is the editing. The jump cuts with every action sequence that, of all the found footage films I've seen, of all the things that people said, this gave me a headache, I wanted to throw up, it gave me motion sickness. This is the only film in history of all the films I've seen in theaters where I wanted to curl up and wanted a frickin' aspirin. It broke my mind. My number 4 is probably a film you've never even heard about, and it tries apparently to be the sequel to Raging Bull, and it is cheap, it is atrocious, it barely feels like there's any story in it whatsoever. It is the Bronx Bull. I had no expectations for this movie when I saw it. Not only was I not liking the quality of the movie in terms of technical, set design, acting, story, but at the same time, it got to a point when there was only 10 minutes left, and I was questioning, what is this even about? Where is the story? There's essences of story, there's little brief moments of little stories that don't feel finished. Where is the story? I was still wondering that question when the movie actually ended. But I'll probably talk about this more in detail whenever I actually review it. If I ever get the chance to review it. My number 3 is the worst horror movie of this year, in my opinion, and that is The Bye-Bye Man. The only scary thing about this movie is the house and how messed up it looks and how disjointed and just random it is and how the proportions almost feel like a dollhouse and it's kind of creepy. That is literally the only scary thing about this movie, but this isn't even a haunted house movie. It's a sort of Freddy ripoff meets Slender Man ripoff of something else, maybe. I don't know. There is really funny moments in this movie, but it's a horror movie, so you're not supposed to laugh. Which makes it bad. There's baffling decisions, and while some people believe, oh, this is a parody, I beg to differ. I completely disagree because it was very serious, and it's just unintentional comedy. The Bye-Bye Man, his backstory, and what he is never explained in this movie. And you're like, okay, well, you just read the short story this is based off of. You shouldn't have to read something in order to understand it in movie form. They could have found a way to make the backstory in it and found a way to really make all these things match. But every little thing that the Bye-Bye Man does, his powers, the dog that he has, the symbolism of the trains, it's completely brushed over and never explained, and it just feels completely random. And some could say, oh, well, this was meant to be an R-rated movie, this would have helped. No. I saw the R-rated version. Does nothing. Adds nothing. The problem is with the story, the acting, the dialogue, the directing, all that stuff. And you can't change that by just making it R and having a little bit more blood. I have a feeling I'm going to have to do a deeper review of this one too. My number 2 is what I feel the worst animated film of this year so far is, and I actually got to see it in theaters. Most people have avoided this, probably don't even know this exists. It is Spark, A Space Tale. And while I'm hearing the Emoji Movie is really awful, I still can't imagine it being worse than A Spark Tale. It is a combination of so many things, and while it's baffling and kind of funny to see every time you see something that, oh, this ripped off this, at the same time it's done in such a generic fashion, by the numbers kind of fashion, that it's just surface level and just boring. There are moments in this film that I'm thinking, wow, this should be unintentionally hilarious. Why am I not laughing? Oh, because I'm actually bored with this film. And the craziness in this movie isn't even entertaining. The animation isn't all that good. The only good things about this movie is the voice acting and the framing and camera work, whatever you want to call it. I mean, you can call it cinematography, but it's all computer animated, so it's not like there's an actual camera. So I guess it would still be classified as cinematography, right? Only good things in this movie. Everything else, some of the worst I've seen this year. And its moments of comedy and childish humor is absolutely painful. Just painful. I can't believe we got Spark a Space Tale in our theaters, but not A Monster Calls, not Colossal, not The Void. We got Spark a Space Tale instead. Thankfully I saw it for free. But my number one worst film of 2017 so far this year, or at least when it comes to the first half of this year, is Bad Kids of Crestview Academy. Now I've been back and forth with the bottom three, which is, like I said, Spark Space Tale and the Bronx Bull and the Bioman actually. So yeah, the top four worst. I've been juggling back and forth. But right now I have the Bad Kids of Crestview Academy as my worst. Turns out this is a sequel. Didn't know that watching this film. I noticed, like, at the beginning it said Bad Kids Go to Hell or something like that with a 2 in it instead of T-O. And I'm like, is this a sequel? This doesn't feel like a sequel, but at the same time it expects us to know some sort of backstory and some sort of curse that feels random in this movie. And it turns out it is a sequel to a movie called Bad Kids Go to Hell. Why didn't they call this Bad Kids Go to Hell with a 2 in the middle like it's supposed to? Instead they call it something different. And it's supposed to be comedy horror. It's supposed to be a thriller. But everything feels cheap, badly made. CGI is atrocious. The horror elements is just bland. Some of the acting is fine, but most of it is just bad. There's elements in it that could work, like the mystery elements of how she talks to all these different students that she's in detention with, and to piece together the story of how her sister died. There's things in there that could work, but it's done in a way in this movie that's just so bland, so boring, so terrible, so poorly done. Almost everything about this movie I hate. I've seen worse movies, but as of 2017, this might be my worst one so far. So those were my top 20 worst films of 2017 in the first half of the year. Out of January to June, what are the worst movies that you've seen? Have you seen any of the ones on my list? Probably you have, and probably they're on your worst too. Who knows? And if you like this video and you want to see more, please subscribe and check out my countdowns and movie reviews of 2015, 16, and 17. Or 17. We'll do the and/or. And as always, this is Bruce Gifford, and this was Just My Opinion.